I want to welcome everyone for our panel session, Catalyzing Climate Action at Scale, the Role of Philanthropy and Innovative Finance. What an important implementation session this one is. As Wallace Lowe said this morning, vision without funding is hallucination. He didn't quite say that, but anyway, that's the general idea. Vision without funding is hallucination. And we are going to hear from some leaders here today who will help us turn our vision for climate change into reality and implementation. My name is Marianne Rankin. I have the honor to be the Senior Vice President and Provost at this great university. And it's a great pleasure for us as a university and for me personally to be a part of this incredible summit and forum here today at the University of Maryland. This is such an important time in our history. December's climate conference in Paris resulted in the April 22nd signing of the historic Paris Agreement, and with today's forum, Climate Action 2016 officially launches. Implementation officially launches. The next 2 days spent in DC for the Climate Action 2016 Summit will be instrumental in shaping the future of multi-stakeholder implementation of this new global climate regime across all sectors of society. Not just science and not just policy, but sociology, behavior, all of these kinds of things are going to be included in these action plans. On behalf of the partners and co-hosts of the Climate Action 2016, we are proud at the University of Maryland to be hosting this session. And I know that I speak for all of our faculty and students here when I say how proud we are to have you all on our campus to discuss these critically important questions. And we are in this for the long run as a university. And I hope we can bring many of our university partners in along with us. Of course, they're already there, but in a very real way into the implementation strategies. We want to continue to be involved in the long-term implementation of the plans and commitments that will emerge from this forum today and from the summit. Highly important to this conversation on climate action is the role of philanthropy and investment and finance in general. Taking ideas and individual success stories to national or global scale is a huge undertaking. It will require very serious financial and policy commitments from all potential partners, including universities like ourselves. Many of the leaders and pioneers on the topic of climate action are NGOs, visionary philanthropists like those that are supporting the summit and this forum, nonprofit organizations and foundations who have a true passion for responding to our changing climate. Not just for they're important, not just for their financial support, which of course is critical, and which we appreciate and need deeply, but also because these kinds of people and organizations can be the inspiration and validation for the causes they support. Their success as leaders and contributors in this field also can hinge on being financial innovators and investors, projecting and planning and incentivizing long-term success and sustainability. And it's going to be wonderful to hear from these leaders on stage about their thoughts and plans for these kinds of activities and their history of doing it already. I thought it was incredibly exciting to hear the optimism in the messages from our political leaders this morning, from Vice President Gore also, when he was on campus recently. For so long, at least in my experience, I'm a biologist, and I'm an environmental biologist, actually. So I've been in this for a long time. But the task of changing the world's attitude towards fossil fuels and climate change, at least from the research perspective, seemed to be so daunting that it almost became an excuse for not actually doing anything. Thank goodness for the pioneers in this field who kept at it anyway, many of whom are before you here, and who pushed on in spite of the challenges to the point where Senator Cardin could say this morning, and really Al Gore said the same thing, this is not such a heavy lift. We can do it. And you all are going to be part of the pioneering team that makes that happen. I'm also really proud, from the university perspective, of the great strides being made in areas of innovative finance and philanthropy, and the partnering of these two important topics in such places as our Center for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Leadership and our recently launched Center for Global Sustainability in the School of Public Policy here. And I'm equally proud that the visionary treasurer of our state of Maryland, Nancy Kopp, has been at the forefront of this thinking, focused on finance and climate change and environmental security for many years. She's been urging us as a campus to do this. We have had on this campus for a long time fabulous research going on in climate change and environmental science, and in collaboration with many partners, particularly federal agencies like NOAA and NASA. But I'd say, and Nancy echoed this morning as we spoke at breakfast, that there's been a gap between what's going on in the labs and what is happening with respect to policy. Bob Orr coming here as this visionary leader of our School for Public Policy and catalyzing all this within really a year of his assuming the deanship of the school has been incredible. We're filling that gap now in such an incredible way. And honestly, as provost of this great university, I couldn't be more proud. I'm really pleased. And I'm also extraordinarily proud to be able this morning to introduce a passionate global leader who's heading one of the world's most innovative foundations on climate impact, Ms. Cathy Calvin. Ms. Calvin is president and CEO of the United Nations Foundation, which was created, you may recall, in 1998, thanks to Ted Turner's unprecedented $1 billion gift supporting UN causes and activities. The United Nations Foundation has pioneered the first effort to channel not just millions of dollars, but billions of dollars into global causes. As we look at the critical issue of taking climate action to global scale, the vision of Ted Turner and the leadership of Cathy Calvin and the UN Foundation Vice Chair, Mr. Tim Worth, who you heard from this morning, will help us get there, will be critical to helping us get there. Now, I won't repeat Cathy's almost incredible biography and list of leadership accomplishments. I think you probably either have it before you or can look her up on the web. She's had an incredible history of leadership in many different important causes and organizations. But I'll just say that she has been revolutionary in leading efforts towards a clean energy future and has advocated for the inclusion of women in all levels and sectors of global issues. And we'll be leading our own discussion here this afternoon on philanthropy and innovative finance. Please help me in welcoming Cathy Calvin.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Provost Rankin. That was a great introduction. And And I think you've inspired us to remember that there are many good ideas that have been talked about this morning already, will be talked about this afternoon and over the next 2 days. The key is, how do we move from the great possibility that we all agreed on in December when countries came together in Paris, to move from the possibility to the probability to future success. And that's really why we're all here today. I want to congratulate you, Provost Rankin, for the stuff I've seen today here at the University of Maryland. This campus is walking the talk on sustainability. I've seen it in the bathrooms, I've seen it in the food court, I've seen it all over the campus, and I'm really proud because I think that's exactly the way it needs to be. My husband and my stepson both graduated from the University of Maryland, so it's nice to be here. And I want to acknowledge Dean Orr. When I first saw Dean Orr written on the paper, I thought, who is Dean Orr? I know Bob Orr. When I finally realized, of course, it's Dean Orr. We also know Dean as the UN Whisperer, Dean Orr, as the UN Whisperer. Bob was at the UN for many years, and for many of us in the nonprofit sector, the private sector, even other parts of the public sector, Bob was the American on the Secretary General's floor who could translate us to him and him to us, and to help make sure that the Secretary General's commitment on day one of his tenure in office, which is almost done after 10 years, to make climate change his primary and most significant legacy, could be delivered. And so, Bob, congratulations on all you've done to take that man's great passion and vision and make it both concrete and highly successful, and I think you're still doing that today. Congratulations. Thank you. So, thank you for mentioning Ted Turner, Marianne. You know, Ted has always said that climate change is the great challenge because it's both one of the greatest threats we face, but also one of the biggest opportunities that we have for the 21st century. And this is what is about your future. And so it's so great to see so many young people here today. This is what Ted talks about all the time. This is your future. When we just created the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN last year, looking at an agenda for the next 15 years for what we want in 2030, climate change reduction to 2 degrees or lower is goal 13. These are the goals that you have to lead on, and we are so proud to see so many leaders here in the room. So what we're going to talk about today is the role of philanthropy and innovative finance in scaling up climate action. And I say scaling up because we could make lots of incremental progress, but we need to get to scale. We know a lot about where the money is. There's plenty of money, but how do we put it to the best use? How do we put it behind the best ideas? How do we de-risk it? How do we make sure the public sector can leverage the private sector? That's what we're going to talk about today. And luckily, we have a group of visionaries or hallucinators, whichever you want to call them, who are here with us and are going to lead us on this conversation about moving from aspiration to action. So I'm going to introduce them all very quickly to you and then ask each to make an opening comment, and then we're going to engage in some dialogue, and then we're going to ask you to join us. So I'm going to start with Nancy Kropp, the Maryland State Treasurer, who I understand now is an elected official by being elected by the yes, it's the best way to be elected, I think.
Absolutely.
And you know, she and her office have been for many years key partners in a conference at the UN every other year on investor climate risk. And Nancy, thank you for all the leadership you've shown in that area. You've been a tremendous leader for this state, and it's great to know that you're bringing your passion back home. Stephen Heinz, to her right, is the president of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. He's been there for 15 years. Before that, he was the founder of DEMOS, which promotes public policy research and advocacy. He's a leader in thinking outside the box and in ways that we can use philanthropy in new ways to really take the risks that philanthropy ought to take. Naoko Ishii, to my left, is the CEO and chairperson for the Global Environment Facility, which is the financing mechanism for the UN system for all of the environmental conventions. She's also served as Japan's Deputy Vice Minister of Finance and for the International Monetary Fund. And to her left is Adam Wolfenson, who's a co-managing partner and chairman on the board of directors of Encourage Capital. It's a great name, which is a social and environmental firm that's at the intersection of philanthropy and finance and investment. He's also a film producer. He did a climate change film called Everything's Cool, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. So he's using all the tools available to us. So I'm going to ask Nancy if she, or may I call you Nancy, if she would start by helping us think through kind of what does it take for a state to use this great opportunity that we have to bring climate finance together, and how do you use it to strengthen the institutions that can make such a difference as we move forward?
Well, that's a very big question. Let me say, first of all, welcome to Maryland. We're very proud to have you here, pleased to have you here, and very proud of our university, the new dean, and his great colleagues. Maryland this year, if I just give a commercial.
Of course.
Reestablished a Maryland Climate Change Commission, setting a goal of 40% reduction in emissions by 2030, 40 by 30. We can do it, and we can do it with building the economy, which was part of the resolution. We also have increased our the mandate for a recyclable portfolio up to 25% by 2020 as a state, and we believe we can do that too, and that will grow jobs also. One of my functions is to chair the state pension committee, and that I think is what you were talking about.
Yep.
The state pension fund, $45 billion pension fund for state teachers and employees. And one of the things I've done, one of the exciting ways of doing things, obviously, has been working with the UN and with my fellow public funds. And together, we have worked with CERES. If you don't know it, get to know it, CERES, which is a great organization of many organizations, one of which is a network of investors, INCR, which has a European version also, an Australian version also, and we spend a great deal of time actually trying to get together, exchange both possibilities and promises. Together, it's not all the money we need, but those funds together are close to the three trillion that we are looking for. One of the issues right now, all the funds are, of course, fiduciaries for the retirees. So the question is, how do you invest as a fiduciary in the clean energy, and what are the impediments? And I assume we're going to be talking about that. We are looking for vehicles, but we are moving already not half as quickly as I wish we would. But clearly, for a long-term investor, one of our concerns is mitigating risk. And there are few more real risks, long-term risks, than the impact direct and of climate change and the impact of climate change regulation. And that is how we are moving it into our portfolios. In every investment, every manager, we want to know whether they're aware of the impact of the risk on their investment, or we can't vote for them. Using proxies, using specific investments, and working with other investors to try to get a little legal coordination.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, we're going to come back and talk more about risks, Nancy, and it's so good you put that on the table, because I think that's been one of the things holding us back. The other has been a question, Stephen, that you've been wrestling with, which is, what's the proper way to use a portfolio to advance the cause you believe in, whether it be divestment or actually investment? How did you get to that space, coming from a Rockefeller Brothers fund that was originally founded by fossil fuels? And how do you think about, and how would you advise members of an academic community to think about that big question?
Thank you very much, Cathy. Thank you all for being here. This is so inspiring and encouraging to see this room filled the way that it is, and I want to thank Bob Orr and President Lowe and the provost and all of the faculty and students here at the university for having us and having this event. It's been a wonderful journey for us as a foundation. We are a private grant-making institution that was established by the third generation of the Rockefeller family 75 years ago. And as Cathy said, the original wealth, of course, was John D. Rockefeller's. And he was the first truly global business entrepreneur, and he built the oil industry into a global engine of progress and growth. So, on the other hand, we as a foundation, through the grant-making side of our activities, have been among the leading foundations supporting work on climate change, in our case going back to the early 1980s, when we were supporting research to understand what was happening in the climate, and beginning to support policy thinking, and later more policy advocacy, working in the United States, working in China, working with the UNFCCC process. So in our grant making, we are deeply invested in this challenge. And increasingly over the last 10 years, we became uncomfortable with the fact that while our grant making was largely focused on climate change in a variety of ways, we were still invested in the very fossil fuel companies that were producing the global warming in the first place. And I finally said to our board, you know, it would be as if we were a healthcare grant maker funding research into lung cancer and being invested in tobacco companies. Now, the moral argument was partially persuasive, but we are serious investors. We want to manage our endowment portfolio to produce growth and to produce the opportunity for future generations to conduct philanthropy. And we have very serious investors on our investment committee and on our board of trustees, along with members of the Rockefeller family who constitute 50% of the membership of the board. So, in honesty, we made the decision, the announcement that we were going to divest completely from fossil fuels in September of 2014 during the extraordinary climate week that Ban Ki-moon and Bob Orr organized. But it took us 10 years of work to get to that decision. Because I was asking the question in the early part of the 2000s, how can we look at this institution, this foundation, with a 360-degree view and think about how we manage all of our assets in order to advance our mission in the world? And those assets include our intellectual assets. We have some real thought leaders on the staff. We have leadership capacity. We have independence in our society. We have convening capacity. And in fact, one of the early convenings about Ceres was held at our conference center in 2001. And we also have our brand name, the Rockefeller name, which is an asset. So we started this debate 10 years ago, and to jump to the end, we started working on proxy voting, we started working on investing in climate solutions at market grade, and then we finally put the divestment discussion squarely on the table at the beginning of 2014. And it took us 9 months of internal debate to get all the stakeholders aligned. And at the end of that process, some were more enthusiastic about it than others. But I'm happy to tell you that the most enthusiastic were the members of the Rockefeller family itself. And they have now become globally recognized as far-sighted, principled leaders on the #1 issue of our time. So it can be done. And the last thing I'll say, Cathy, and I apologize if I'm going on too long, it can be done. We are serious investors. We do not want to lose money. And we have established 2 benchmarks now to compare the performance of our investments. One, a standard benchmark that we had before divestment, and then another that is a fossil fuel-free benchmark. And thus far in the process, which is still early days, we are beating both benchmarks. So we're beginning to build the case that you can get out of fossil fuels and still make money and do good by the world.
Wow. I think that deserves a round of applause. And we'll come back to why philanthropy needs to be in the leadership role in this kind of a conversation. And sometimes these things have to be a marathon, not a sprint. Naoko, talk about a marathon. How do you think about an institution like yours making sure that climate and climate action fit into the broader environmental portfolio, but also the entire development portfolio. Now that we know we can't treat climate on one stand and development on another, they are going after the same money, but they're actually solving the same problem. How do you think about that?
Wow, big question. Thank you, Cathy. And first, thank you so much for having me at this wonderful session at the University of Maryland. We just had a conversation with Dean and his colleague that this is a place that we want to break silos. That with young students and the future leaders, we really try to to break this institutional silo or the barriers of the professions so that we can really bring everybody's knowledge and ambition and willingness together to really implement what Cathy actually said or asked that what to do. So the GF is actually that we don't have a 45 billion, we have only 1 billion per year, but it's a grant-making institution, and we try to use this grant to actually catalyze actions in the area that it's really important for the future of the sustainable development. 2015 is such a great year. We had that SDG adopted in September, and then in Paris, that in December we have this climate agreement. These two actually really talk to each other. One common thread of two agreements is that the clear recognition there is a global environmental commons, global commons, be it the climate system, ocean, the forest, and land and water, which is the fundamental condition for the sustainable future of the all human being, including the future generations, so that there is a huge potential if we can implement those two agreements. But then the serious challenge we are now facing, how we can really implement those two, actually that agreements, talking to each other, talking and bringing our future together. Now, that the both two agreements really tell us that we need to find a way to transform the three key important economic systems. One, energy system. Second, urban system. The third, food production system. How we can transform those big three key economic systems. We also had a conversation just ahead of this session. The money itself may not be the issue. We all know the money is available. The challenge is how we can bring those money in the capital market, the pension fund, together to transform those three key economic systems. That is the challenge we are facing, and that's why that it's so important, this multi-stakeholder platform we are promoting, that is being realized. From our point of view, that from GF role, we are the grant-making institution, so that what we are trying to do together with those partners is, say, let's see, in case of energy system, that how we can change this fossil fuel-based energy system to more like a renewable. In case of the food production system, how we can really arrest this food production which is deforesting every day of our planet. Where in case of cities, how we can build this more connected, compact, resilient cities, knowing, say, 75% of the city in India is supposed to be built from now on. So there is a huge, huge stake up there. Just 2 years ago, the former Mexican President Calderon, his group actually published a very interesting report, New Economic Climate Report. It tells that from now on, from 15 years, for next 15 years, in order to these three systems, energy system, city system, food production system, needs $89 trillion for investment as business as usual. But if we want to transform those three key systems, it requires $94 trillion. You can compare these two numbers, 89 and 94. Actually, the difference is only 4 to 5 trillion. It's not a big amount of money. Yeah. However, the challenge is how from now on we can transform those 93 trillion in a transformative way. How we can make energy, food production, and urban system sustainable way. This is the challenge we are facing, and that's why we are here to find a way how we can get pension fund, how to get the capital market, how to get the philanthropy into that way, so that in this context, the GF is really working with them to take the risk of the private sector investment, for instance, to sub-Saharan Africa, small renewable energy investment in sub-Saharan Africa. We actually are working together with pension fund. That we are working with a smallholder in Indonesia and Brazil to make the supply chain of those global commodity more sustainable. And we are actually working with cities and helping city mayors to make their city planning more sustainable and integrated way. So, but we really need to work together to all of us to play our role to make those three systems in a much more sustainable and integrated way. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So Adam, this is right to you now, because what do you say to investors to mobilize them and their access to finances that this 94 trillion is something that they ought to be putting their money in? This is where they're going to make the big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Not just, thanks very much, and thank you, Dinor, and it's an honor to be on this panel. I work generally in the impact investment community, where Dinor is typically known as Audrey Choi's husband. So it's nice to know you're competent in your own right as well. It's great to be here. And specifically on the 90 some odd trillion dollars, I think it's really important, as you clearly said, but it's important to underline that this is investment. I think too often in these discussions, people go, oh my gosh, we've got to come up with 90 trillion of grants. And as you say, how do we prove it makes a difference? Yes, it makes a difference, but how do you prove that it's actually a risk-adjusted rate of return that is compelling for an investor, because most of this is coming from fiduciaries. So that's the equation, I think, that we're trying to solve, because you need both, right? It needs to work on the finance side, and it also needs to work on the carbon side. Just a little bit about us. We broadly are set up to, also building on this theme of breaking down silos and multi-stakeholder processes, is any big issue, climate, the biggest of them, requires a very, very deep collaboration between policy, philanthropy, and investors to solve a problem. These are systemic issues, and they're going to require systemic solutions. So in our firm, we'll typically work a lot with foundations. For example, we've just done a lot of work around sustainable fisheries, where a foundation will work with us to help figure out what are investment solutions that would go alongside philanthropy, but commercial capital that could be invested alongside philanthropy and concessionary capital to really solve a problem. And I think those are the types of approaches that we're using in climate as well. There have been fantastic returns in the climate space, and there have also been, the clean tech meltdown of a number of years turned a lot of family offices and endowments off of the space. I'm happy to say a lot of them are returning to the space now, and that broadly clean energy investment in companies, and we should differentiate between that and project finance, is receiving quite a renaissance, I would say, from the family office community. There are, from the endowment side and the large institutional investors, clearly there have been gatherings like this for many, many years saying we've got long-term assets, which are really predictable. Renewable energy is a fantastic long-term investment, which should match with a lot of investors' liabilities. Why isn't that happening, right? Why isn't more money going to it? And about 10 years ago, I think there were a lot of misconceptions, and that was a great opportunity for smaller investors who perceived that the risk of these assets was actually quite low. They made outsized returns. Now, certainly, Treasurer Kopp and almost any institutional investor probably has a pretty reasonable perception of the risk of a wind and solar plant. Not very much, so there's no outsized returns to get, but there are still a lot of barriers. And I guess if I have one key point, it is at the Paris announcement, this huge focus on technology innovation. Bill Gates came out with a bunch of billionaires and said, we need to invest in basic science to solve this critical issue, and mission innovation. States came in, we've got to do deep science research, which is great, but we do not have time for that. And there's a tired debate about innovation versus deployment. If to engage in that, I would generally say deployment, but what we actually need is innovation in finance. And it requires just as much effort and just as much effort from philanthropists, from investors, from academia, from policy, as a new storage technology, as a new photovoltaic technology, is not just something that you do on the side. And so that's one of the areas that we're trying to do, is get a counterbalance to the push for innovation in technology, for push for innovation in finance, because we need it.
Great. Well, Adam, since you've turned us around this corner of what are the hurdles, let me ask you if you just want to stay with that one more round, and then I'd like to hear, for instance, from Stephen about some of the hurdles. What keeps philanthropy from really stepping into this area, maybe the pension funds? Where are we just not getting the traction? What might it be in your sector that we could do a little differently, or what does another sector need to do to make sure we're really getting the scale?
Sure, and this is always an interesting dance with policy, of course, because one could say, oh, well, if we just have this fantastic global price on carbon, this would all go away. And, it probably wouldn't, but let's operate on the assumption that we're not going to have a radical policy change. And when you look at low carbon energy development, you say, how is our financial system not up to that task? And how is it different than other sorts of infrastructure that we're building? It turns out it's much higher capital expense up front, right? As opposed to a big fossil fuel plant, you don't have ongoing fuel costs, but you got a lot of money to put in up front. And also a lot of the new renewables, and something that I personally believe will get that 94 trillion down significantly, is doing new models of lighter weight distributed generation, which involves a lot of areas of, it's much more about not just a single counterparty risk, not just, what's the credit of utility X or country Y, but it's what's the credit of 1 billion people if we're going, roof to roof, or small companies, tiny enterprises that don't really have credit. So it's that kind of credit evaluation that is specific to a lightweight distributed low carbon energy rollout. It's currency, right? The growth of energy, the growth of low carbon energy, all this is going to turn into the fast growing emerging economies in Africa and in Asia, and how do we mobilize global low-cost capital into markets within capital markets. So, people have been kvetching about these same financial barriers for a long time, and we just need to have greater emphasis on it, because the urgency is here today, and like you said, the capital is there, and the really high leverage opportunities.
Great.
So counterparty insurance and currency would be 2 top ones, but there are 5 more.
Great suggestions. Treasurer Kopp, what do you think?
Just quickly, a couple of things. First of all, I do think that we're going to need the new technology, and I'm glad our university is doing work in this area, storage. The one thing we need, and I stressed earlier, we're a fiduciary, and the other pension funds are fiduciaries too, which means you don't have quite the flexibility that you did if you were a family fund or a foundation. What we need is something that's very simple, which is uniform disclosure. We have financial accounting standards by which we can compare all of the companies that we invest in. We don't yet have those solid, comparable numbers for sustainability. So we really don't know. We have been trying to work with the SEC to get them to try to adopt some standards. Michael Bloomberg is chairing a international task force that is trying to look at some standards. There is, in fact, a thing called the SASB, the Sustainability
Accounting Standards Board.
Accounting Standards Board.
Like FASB.
But we have to be able to know what it is we are investing in. And as of now, for us, it seems to be still a little too cloudy.
Mm-hmm. That's a specific. Mm-hmm. Stephen, how about philanthropy? What are we thinking about that?
Well, I think the biggest barrier is conventional wisdom. Mm-hmm. I think it is conventional wisdom to think that since energy has been such a large part of the global economy for so long, and such a successful one, that it will always be that way. But this is an obsolete notion, because we are dealing with an economic model that is now 250 years old and is no longer appropriate given what we know about the future of this planet. So all of us, but universities in particular, philanthropy as your partner, I think educating, training, and having this debate to overthrow this conventional wisdom and get away from carbon-fueled capitalism and to the new economic model of the 21st century.
So they're visionaries, hallucinators, and revolutionaries. Okay, just to establish it all up front. Now, Coco.
Guilty as charged.
Guilty as charged. Do you want to add to the list of barriers and some challenges that we're still working to overcome?
I think that we have been seeing some kind of progress how to address those barriers. The Adam mentioned that still there is a kind of perception about risk and regarding the risk. I think that if that risk is related to this unfamiliarity of the market, in case of particularly, for instance, sub-Saharan Africa renewable energy, I think by our taking that kind of perception risk that public institution taking the perception risk, we are able to, I think that get some of the flow from like pension into that market. And then sometimes we are working with policy side to say, example is that in case of South Africa, we worked with the government of South Africa to get the feed-in tariff into the wind farms. So there is another example that working together, this finance side and the policy side, that we were able to bring some of those barriers and bring those barriers down. Sometimes we do the capacity building that in case of, say, a Chinese energy efficiency industry, that we work with actually local financial institutions to provide the capacity building, how to do, for instance, energy audit, so that their energy efficiency investment be real, that energy efficiency investment. So that there are several ways that by working together, policy side, capacity side, taking risk side, and also maybe aggregation cost, because we see some, quite a number of small investment, like changing the street lighting in case of cities from conventional to the LED, but each of the investment is too small to go to the capital market, so we kind of bundle them and we pay that an aggregation cost so that a bunch of mayors can go to the capital market. So there are quite a number of techniques I think we used, and we were providing those kind of methods. But one of the most important thing, which is already mentioned, is this how this information of the long-term investment, is this sustainable, not sustainable? That once that investors get kind of information, it has already started to impact in a big way. So that power, the power of the information, I think we cannot underestimate it.
I want to make sure we allow for a few questions from the audience. So if people want to queue up, maybe I'll take 3. I'm not sure we have more than that. We'll take them all at once and then let the panel answer them. And I know we started a little late, so maybe we can go just a little late, but maybe somebody can give me some guidance on that. I think what you've already been hearing is we've made the turn from just barriers to also already looking at what are some of the shovel-ready innovations that are being discussed and explored. And I think that's an important piece of this conversation as well. This is not a long-term R&D, as Adam said. There's things that can be done right now as we learn and build on our successes. So I'm not seeing where the microphones are. If there's anybody who's got a burning question, and I think I see. Yes, no? If not, let me turn. I'll keep this going with this great panel, because I think we have some.
There is a question back there, Cathy,
okay?
in the corner.
Yeah, please go ahead.
A brave soul.
Right.
Just speak out real loud.
Does he have to come forward? Oh,
There we go.
that's a waste.
Thank you.
All right, he's going to move so we can see him. That's good. Thanks.
Behind the greenery there.
All right.
I'm Arjun Makijani from the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research. For nearly 4 years, I've been doing a roadmap for renewable Maryland, wind and solar, all the cost elements. I'm an engineer. I concluded that it'll be cheaper to do renewables than to do business as usual, quite a bit cheaper. So the big question is actually the one this panel is confronting: how to channel the existing capital available, whether to banks or the Exxons or whatever, into this field, not only in this country but globally. Because I think it will be cheaper at least by my calculation. Could be wrong, but my best shot. Quite a bit cheaper, so not a marginal difference. So that's my question is, the big capital is being held by all these giant companies, most of whom have a vested interest in the existing. And you know, somebody said this Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, but you know, in the Stone Age they didn't have lobbyists. So that's sort of the difference, and so that's the problem I think we have.
Great point. Thank you. Good question. I think that's exactly the right one to turn it back to the panel, unless we've got another question burning to come up. Stephen, go ahead.
So just a quick, I mean, this, I think all of the panelists have touched on this, but I agree with you completely, and thank you for the research that you've been doing. I think another one of the barriers that is holding all this back is the policy framework. Because right now, because of the conventional wisdom that still guides economic thinking, we have a lot of incentives to continue doing what we're doing. And we don't yet have the right set of incentives to help stimulate the market demand for the kinds of goods and services that will comprise the clean energy economy. And without that, it's going to be hard to ramp up the investments as quickly as we need to do it. So the policy framework is very, very important.
Yeah, we also have, of course, you've got power plants that are already built. So it's not coming from a standing start. But even if you were starting from scratch here, I think the implementation of Stephen's conventional wisdom, the rubber hits the road in the financial community, and the structures that are implicit in the financial community is we know how to build big power plants much better than we know how to do interesting solar city distributed gen. That's the next generation of the business models, but that's what we need more of.
Yeah.
I think I see one more question, and then we'll try to do a wrap up here. Go ahead.
Yes, Sudhir Shukla with Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. What do you think about the scope of projects or funding for projects that show the potential for things that can lead to policy or lead to more implementation? So I guess I'm speaking in particular about so-called carbon farming. So there have been researchers who claim that, for example, David Johnson at New Mexico State, he has an agricultural production system that of cover cropping year long that he claims can sequester 15 tons of CO2 per acre per year. So, but there's not a lot of research done on this in a wide scale. So what about funding research that implements these practices in a real life setting, in a real life farm, and producing papers that can be peer reviewed, so more awareness can be created about the potential. And then also, for example, on the grazing side, you have holistic planned grazing that is claimed to be able to sequester say roughly on average 4 tons of CO2 per acre per year.
Great, thanks. This is a broader question about innovation and research, and how do we fly the plane while we're also trying to build for the future. So Naoko, do you want to just maybe think about that just a little bit, because I think you guys are seeing some of that innovation around the world, not just the United States.
Yeah, actually, the one point I got from your question is that it's not that difficult to come up with a renewable energy efficiency project because economics is clear, how to put the price and how to calculate the risk is not that difficult. The more difficulty when we come up with a project comes from more like a natural resource management. How to measure that the value of the benefit of deforestation or cost of deforestation, how to do this agriculture project more sustainable, so that when we and then Adam talk about fisheries, the blue carbon, these are much more difficult to put prices in terms of the benefit and the cost, so that we are actually moving towards this new frontier of how we can let the capital market into those new area of natural resource management, be it the deforestation or stopping deforestation, doing the blue carbon, so that I just would like to say it's a new area, new frontier. We are really working hard to capture those new areas, because unless we find a way to get the capital or financial resource into that major area. Just a small energy sector thing really can't achieve the entire purpose. So that is work in progress.
And Nancy, are there enough vehicles that you can invest in as a pension
We
fund
are
yet?
always looking, for more vehicles and for vehicles that are structured in a way that is appropriate, again, for fiduciary plan. And Stephen was talking earlier about joint ventures, which I think may be part of it. I mean, some of this may be absolutely low risk, but we don't know that. So you have to have a pot that you can really, a high risk, potentially high return pot. And that really depends on the particular fund and how liquid it has to be and what its obligations are, how well funded it is, et cetera. So that if you could bring people together, everybody has got some. And then once something starts, of course, then you've got the vehicles.
Well, I'm going to steal a quote from Al Gore and Wallace Stevens. I think it's an Al Gore riff on a Wallace Stevens quote,
Right.
who says, after the final no comes a yes. And on that yes, our future depends. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to all talk about here today. And I've asked the panel if they would to give us each a bit of a thought to leave the room with about what we need to do to continue to accelerate our action. I called it a bon mot, but they can do whatever they want with it. And Stephen, I'll just ask if you want to go first with a parting shot.
I already told you I didn't have one.
I know. I bet he does.
But I will come up with a bon mot. No, I guess I was going to say, I was thinking about this because this was not something we had prepared in advance, but Cathy mentioned it as we were coming down here. You know, at the end of this, I'm going to ask you each for a bon mot. And I'm thinking, oh gosh. So I was going to say something that I probably can't legally because it may sound too much like electioneering or campaigning, and I'm not supposed to do that as a foundation president. But this is an important year. And a CNN poll that was released this morning says that only 50% of Americans say climate is extremely or very important to them as they think about the fall elections. And everybody in this room obviously thinks it's extremely important, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So I would just urge you to try to help your friends, your neighbors, your family feel as urgent about it this year as you do. We need to think about this because the future of the world actually depends on it.
Although I would think 50% thinking it's extremely important
Extremely or very.
or very
It's pretty good.
important is a pretty
good.
big thing.
But it's still the lowest of all the issues on the list. It's still the lowest
You
one.
didn't say that.
Yeah.
There's work to do.
No, I would just say that from my personal perspective, I mean, the earth is getting warmer, the waters are getting warmer, the waters are rising, the storms are surging, but the sky isn't falling. And I think that we are going to work together and come out fine. And I think, thank God, a lot of it is a technology problem, not just a political one. And often technology is easier than political, but it's both, of course.
Great. Those are two good ones. Naoko.
Right. I want to work on the catalyze the global movement for global commons. We were talking about climate change, but it really goes beyond climate change. Be it ocean, that then forest, land, the water, that then we are now really working on the global commons to fix the climate change is a very important part. 2015 really gave us a great platform for us to squarely face this challenge. So what we need is to create or catalyze this global local movement. Again, 2015 was great. SDG was agreed by all over the world. And the climate change, not only the national government, you see such an action from the business and finance and local citizens. So we need to continue to catalyze those global and local actions for global commons.
Great. Adam.
Yeah, I think in short, the future is very difficult to predict. And if you look back at the incredible cost reduction we've seen in renewable energy over the past 7 years, absolutely nobody predicted that before it happened. And so as we look at cost predictions for the future, I think we can see some climate science surprising to the downside, but I think we can all hope that the pace of deployment and innovation continues to surprise to the upside. And I'll end on a biodiversity and land use question. Investors, we ourselves are probably worse than most at predicting the future. And the best investment in our firm's history was an investment in forestry carbon for the California market that was done almost entirely philanthropically, but returned 6 or 7 times and brought $40 million into the White Mountain Apache tribe. And it's a forestry carbon project with incredible, protected 100,000 acres of forest. Great money into an incredibly underserved community. And I think it was great to bring in forests because we don't solve this problem without the protection of tropical forests. And that market can also be incredibly profitable if you work in partnership with policy.
Well, those are pretty good predictions, calls to action, and reflections for all of us. I think Adam reminds us at the end also that the private sector is evolving very quickly too, both in the way it sees its own impact and footprint, but also where it can provide leadership across the board with its supply chains, its sector work, how it appeals to its customers. So I think we all as customers and consumers can deeply affect that as well. I'm going to wrap us up so that those of you who I think I saw at the very end with a hand up will have a chance to come up and talk to our panelists individually and maybe get your questions addressed in a different way. Thank you so much for being with us today. This is critical, and good luck.